I'm friends, I'm Vitaly Portnikov. Tilky yet, we did not know yet. The President of Ukraine votes in his readiness before the presidential elections in Ukraine. The greatest hour and behavior is still a day before the appearance of a visible structure's deputy of the servant of the people faction. The vision of the legislator is about the position, so that the famous law about the elections is now the temple mill. I guess that you supposedly know that in the situation of Kola. The naked temple camp is not like presidential and parliamentary elections in Ukraine. And it is not possible to conduct legislation, and it is not possible. And with such a rank, in principle, we can persuade you about the fact that in order for the elections to be simple, it is really necessary to have a famous view of the legislation, and the Kosovets have a military camp. A discount matchmaker's military camp of the fault is not his, a single real situation, snake on the law. That allowed ordinary election of the President Diskovogo 100. Rich with such a snake in position. However, we are on the right side of my truth from DOS, I would say, a reasoned political game. Like the President of Ukraine VD with the President with the state received. The President is on staff with the received ones. I give out an interview to a politician, saying that I am not happy with the fact that there are no elections held in Ukraine. So richly for an hour. They still respect democracy from the war, but I think I am a democracy without elections. Ignore the fact that Ukraine is May the 4th Rick, find real tired of the guilt of the Russian Federation. Now thou in the territory of these fighters, I'll be honest. They are also held here on the territory of the whole of Ukraine. The rockets reach the Transcarpathian region, as you know. So that's why we can't hold presidential parliamentary elections, and not that I don't like to hold them. The president of the parliament is Sami Hromadyan of our Ukraine. And now he will see Trump absolutely clearly. Ready before the election. Before their holding. For what is needed on the Tilka, in it the behavior of treason from the legislation. And now I'm going to tell you that Zelenskyy at 1 hour rolled up to American and European partners for a proposition. For securing an election hour. And what does it really mean? Date Ukrainian Hromadyan in Vilna to vote. The minds for early voting are tied to the styles of the election campaign, and the most and the choice. And in your minds, there will be an election campaign and elections, because even at 1 o'clock, Russian troops will continue to attack the positions of Ukrainian troops. This will mean even more Hromadyans of Ukraine are serving in the dropped forces of Ukraine. There will be no mats, and not with the candidate, and not to read them is not an election program, and not a debate on the type of social media. And there will also be rocket attacks by both Russian and unmanned territories of Ukraine. There can be no allegedly real election campaigns, what is not in such situations with a bill of sale and a sprat of people. Pre-election of the candidate for the post of President of Ukraine. There will be bought accesses to electronic on I still Russia will continue Ukrainian energy with such a rank, and there will be mats. The electrician also turn on the computer TVs and well propane the candidate for the presidency of Ukraine. The elections themselves cannot, in a situation, be exposed to the windy alarm. That there will not just be a torn selection process in the minds of the Commission, but the elections themselves, for example, will not overestimate the place of voting. Such a rank cannot be provided by the selection process. And Tilka buts come to mind about the election of a military camp, because it's not a military camp. There's also the president and the parliament wanted a military camp. And the military camp is now the very directory of guilt, I repeat, on the entire territory of Ukraine, on the whole. With this rank, Vladimir Zelenskyy rolled up to the president from the ones received in the state of Donald Trump. Adoring about the elections in Ukraine. With pro about these elections. And the elections may also be in the interests of Democrats of all peoples. I am on the side of President Trump's friend. President Putin of Russia. Russian President Putin. You are now saying that we have an illegitimate president, and not knowing with whom to sign, and to please me. I have negotiated with President Trump's envoy. Not, of course, Yak will be able to hold a referendum, extorting in Ukraine. In such minds just deaf and cut. Putin, well, fine. TPPR Trump can, but Putin and for Propanovady, he was given fighting ideas on the territory of Ukraine before. The moment of the presidential, or we can hold presidential and parliamentary elections in our Ukraine for an hour. Maybe presidential tilkas. I will still have fights, we will not tell him, for a period of up to 90 days. Ukraine will have everything it is possible to conduct an election campaign, and the elections themselves. Even Putin is not the idea the president received in the state, in our European allies, to ensure the elections. Closing the sky over Ukraine for the fate of American European aviation, as if Russian missiles and drones. And so their location in Russia has not yet been introduced to our democratic process. It is possible to withdraw strikes on the positions of Russian troops, American aircraft, so that they do not overpower our Ukrainian temples and the pre-election rally of the brothers candidates for the fate. We will vote, and the Americans will fight. What are they? I'm also their president, and your cool democracies. So the test. And you, of course, that I'm being sarcastic. There will be no tag. President Trump, obviously, has a brother and a fate for my adoration, and not in the closure of the Ukrainian sky. And not in the fate, in strikes on the positions of Russian troops, which he brought to the end, and his friend for whom and so. In pro-economic projects. And the president of the Russian Federation, ostensibly, of course, does not have a greedy adoration to end the Russian-Ukrainian guilt in the long term. And the Ukrainian elections have come on itself to the fact that, respecting the territory, I have overgrown the Ukrainian state, the eternal territory of Russia. I am a border, and I will come to the Russian Federation. And here all the elections are not of the president of Ukraine, the president of Russia, Putin. As you know, the election of the president of Russia is a skin Maya, not Putin's election. Lily Putin. In short, The TPPR is written by the statements of the President of Ukraine. No one can say that Ukraine and Vlad Tilka are going to wage war, that they will be afraid of elections. And the trump card of Russian propaganda, I'm sticking out to the Trumpists with such a deputy. This is the issue of the representation of the ultra-right political forces with the speech received in the States and Europe, is absolutely obvious. TPPR Tika is extremely still President Trump will say on Chebuzegoli. Not a rotten torture. I was informed about the fact that Trump is the sky, yes, in an hour to two. With the fact that the weather and so we are invited by propositions. Yaki includes the exit of Ukrainian visas from the territory of Donetsk region. In exchange for UMOV American guarantees for Ukraine, and I am legally on we are, of course, greedy and tied up and the administration. You don't want to protect us in your beloved Russia. And if I am more profitable for the Trump family, then his close friends are equipped. That's the whole story. So I think this is the right one. And you can experience. And what about the report, what will happen? Sasha is so about the pack for himself, not in a police situation. I will often tell you, nothing is not here who is not. And as a result of the claims, I have already explained this to you. And we are also saying that Putin is a wrapped. What will you do with him? I'm wearing Russian people's helmets over my head, and will wrap Medvedev around Matvienko and tell him to hold elections. We are a filled-in war for 90 days. At the best chances in such elections, the military booths are still in the hall at the best hour of the military election. I don't think I'll explain it to what, but I will. There can be a lot of competition in such elections. We still have a marathon against them. One time, Kola in Zahali did not understand which of the real competitors. He can lean out on the presidential landing in such minds. Well, that's really seeming. The same Beano will continue. So, who from the dignified maiden politicians can lean out on the landing and make tough statements and not so much? What is the correctness of the president's foreign policy course even before the Ukrainian territories? No one will tell. The Donetsk region is the president I have promised Putin, isn't it? It is unlikely that Valery Zavodny will firm the posad sent to Britain still taken part in the elections, and Kirill Budanov to hear the landing of the head office of the Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine. Guilt. Andriy Beletsky is smart there. From the front. I'm not going to be smart about the election campaign. The eyelids will take the fate, spoilers of Vladimir Zelenskyy. In the boor of the chances of the election, Modi have bilsh gently booth nastepne. Propanote that such elections will actually preach Diskavogo and future mean in icons of your Subatinia. They're still side 2019 kind. Talk about the fact that Peta Tilke on one term, and already the cob of guilt, I say that I will hang out of guilt. Ukraine will not hear the blame now. Well, that's noble. And yet, Trump cannot provide Ukraine with elections now, and he cannot provide Ukraine with elections now. And Putin, and according to the idea of elections now, if you don't want to accept the idea of elections now, then tell me, and he doesn't give up absolutely anything. Nothing is wrong with the current situation, as it is absolutely obvious. So I think the situation will develop. And we are waiting with you for the American reaction at the same time. The president made a rich statement at a press conference. Let's say one said ready on fire in the energy sector. About the position to Putin. You used the attacks, our energy, and we used the energy of the Russian attacks on Avtoprobig complex of the Russian Federation. A really serious story. Yaka overgrown, can tesh bottles for and still Putin, so we have elections in the hall to work with the Autopriordny complex. So the chain is also simple. Another important point was also made at the press conference. Ukraine is still overgrown, and I don't have the strength to get it on the turn of the Crimea about the fact that Ukraine will not be a temple shlyak of the occupied territory. About the position along the demarcation line. But another important NATO statement is that Ukraine really wants to pass to NATO, and in Kiev they know for sure that they are getting a staff, and not a sprat, not to bash Ukraine in the alliance today. Well, this is absolutely the creator of the claim. Moreover, we are with you too, Mark, that it began not with parts of President Trump, but with parts of President Obama. Let's become president. I know that President George Bush Moloch was on the field of real Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. And he failed to convince the leaders of Unmarked and France's Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, of the reluctance in Ukraine of a plan for membership. And already the president-elect with Barack Obama received in the state, and his successor, allegedly without real adoration, was put before the idea of accepting a donation from Ukraine. So, President Joseph Biden speaks about the fact that NATO, not Russia, and you will rush from Euro-Atlantica, integration of Ukraine, is not enough. Although not so demonstratively, like Donald Trump, in my opinion, we are also marking the fiasco of the NATO summit in Vilnius. Biden and the non-NATO leaders had a public statement from the position even before Ukraine joined, before the Euro-Atlantic alliance. So these are the statements I made from one side, demonstrate constructiveness. His willingness to follow the Americans far away, and to demonstrate the helpless Americans themselves. I think we've already gone. You know, of course, that in this Trumpian idea, they defend the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the territory of Yaku. And the Russians could not win Yaku in 11 hands last time. Not for remembers, I kicked out their saboteurs from Kramatorsk and Slavik Tilka. It was, and remember, not just the belittling of Ukrainian sovereignty, but the discarded son of the Russian Federation without any real minds for us. missed forte, and on will still be able to catch Tilka for a rocky sprat in the ass at the current pace. Am I still fucked up? And with Trump, we don't need to cook. And Trump is in a hurry. Of course, don't till the lime for the Nobel Prize to the mayor with you. Another important one is another hour pops up. I won't be any more specific for 2 more years, but I think I won't just be on the tick yet. Ukraine is not ready to hand over the territory of Russia to itself. So I won't go to the real ones, and then the frisky holy Americans will come to work on the cob, which will be the real cob of the election campaign. And Trump is now richly ignoring the election campaign and the fact that it is important for American elections and democracy, in which screws are not on and insignificant. And among the Republican drinking parties in Ukraine, respecting our Ukraine, it is necessary and in our justice to be with you, and to direct that Russia itself, and Trump sends that son-in-law. To add self-serving parting for him is such an incredible fuss to that and jitters to that such to the extent. As for Ukraine, so understand that you have a Ukrainian theme. Trump was not allowed. Here is an honest interview of a politician on Sprat and 7000 about Ukraine. You know, of course, that Trump would talk about the topic with journalists, because there can't be a drain to disguise their sympathies to the Russian regime. And he wanted to talk about what a year for the process. And this is a really complicated situation to the fact that everything is literally falling out of Trump's hands for foreign policy. Thailand and Cambodia are fighting again, not like the Nobel Prize. Africa had a peace year signed in Chervov a long time ago. The fighting started again, not like the Nobel Prize. At the gathering, the situation is the same for whom production is before a new conflict. And already today, one of the Israeli ministers who wrote the wines, Mikhail Shikli, wrote the wines of Syria, not like the Nobel Prize. Well, and tomorrow I will really unpick all sorts of active ideas in the Venezuela area, than we know in Zali. And up to these heirs for the received states, because it seems that you can still roll everyone. And you will come out, these are political problems for the usurping authoritarian regime of Nicolas Samadur. And the reality may be that you don't hand over a richly folded one, allegedly. Of course, dear friends, Tom is not Schvidko, bent, and sometimes even a Democrat, for the landing, that Ukraine is in the elections. And about Russia, such elections. The whole democracy of the beach is in this election. Well, again, let's not talk about Russia at a time, but you don't pass hundreds, and it's absolutely obvious. And overgrown, it will simply be necessary to check, yak bucket sweet, yak bucket Trump. For all about the position, to ensure the election of the President of Ukraine. Still, such moments about I just want to say extremely cannot be so important in those situations. It's just fun. Having said that it is easier to liquidate the president's office, it is lower to recognize it richly. So the trial of journalists of wine and richly entered. That yak Andriy Yermak, having pretended the office of the President of Ukraine to a parallel of our Ukraine. And we need to replace everything with the Verkhovna Rada and the legal real itself. Of course, that's just not a dita, and how had the institution? There's still enough institute, and of course, I don't give up on the function, and it's important to torture. I am, and will be the functions of the tax office. It will just be a bureaucrat. I will provide the President of Ukraine with stationery and logistics of the President of Ukraine in his oysters, both on the domestic political and on the foreign policy straight. And as if Yermak and Zubov are knitted to pretend and the office is an analog of another row, I will be behind my important ones. It is important for the parliament and the legitimate all. And I think those people are dating. Check the visible type of clinging behavior. What do you want, Vidmina? So that I am a clerical opponent, and Bob is your favorite. Yak, you're playing a role in the office. About life in the office, and clerical opponents, and they were your favorites. And I'm so, of course, for the statement of Vladimir Zelenskyy himself. Not you means the situation, which means it's not mine, and I'm not a petty brother's candidate for the fact that everything is of course a minefield. You will come to the office, and the president will be told by the control barrel, control over the parliament. From drifts so wonderfully organized. And what do? We still have his discounts in exchange for the arch-in on the table. I took it for the body, but what about the office? You call out the head of the Verkhovna Rada to the Prime Minister, well, then you are also elected at once. And you will punish we burned out the Prime Minister's speakers, who are you. And the President, let's say also so that you take the usurpation of Vlad in the office here again. I haven't provided the office yet. Straight. Of course, that such food is not about such Vladi for dates. Just Vladimir Alexandrovich, Kima is not a Buddha. A bureaucrat chew your head, and a lover. What do you want? As if I am such a president, it is written in the Constitution, and that you are such a president. Well, and indeed in such situations, the president is absolutely right to liquidate the office. And to find a favorite structure. And in general, the president is right, but they are right. You can also say another significant power supply. You don't wash away the jealousy with Trump's blackmail, with the Vimo and the type of territory. Does not have that value a little. And she said Skoy political crock. I'm still on the air. I am already asking you to subscribe to the channel for those who are not subscribed. We ended till 9,000 subscriptions to million. And such a mria is opened for a new Rick million. Here Trump wants Ukraine for Russia's own gain, from this million hole in a bagel firm, and not to Ukraine. And I want a million for richly, legitimately and correctly adoration. Because it will also mean the success of kayak journalists in new informative minds. So subscribe. So caress, put in a podobake with the channel tools. I will be with you all in the Diaknaya Shiro. And except for the torture of the yaks, the ranks came to hand over to you that Trump, taking off his mask, and standing in the coalition from Russia, distributing the zones of entry. I don't think it will be so easy for Trump to distribute the zones of entry from Russia. To the fact that Russia does not have no independent zones, I will swim in at the moment. And Russia itself will reach People's Republic of China. In order for Russia to express all sorts of things from the real zone of entry, Russia is in reality. And not like Trump propane and steel. Ukraine. So I am extremely respectful of Trump, would like Ukraine to end this blame on low-minded minds, what Ukraine did in May. I'll tell you that Trump is a far-right politician. To Humpty. Ludina chauvinistic, imperialistic, anti-democratic looks. Ludina his hands in the 20th I just slept. I mean, I don't know, Elon Musk. I'll hide the kiss. I'm calling. But I'll hide the kiss. And she slipped through, the tables were asleep, and now you are helping us turned into a suite in Januli. To turn to our long-standing meetings of envoys with the staff received in Russia will be to agree to bypass the Trump sanctions. So I knock such information off of those sanctions, Yaki Donald Trump aqueducts against head Naftowich Russian companies. Rosneft Lukoil, and indeed in many places, and there is a Lukoil refueling station. And at car natural plants, let's say there in Bulgaria, and at the cleaning service. The principle of treason I will really allow in Russia is turned into an honest keel of profit in those companies I have. Before I have the idea of these sanctions. Trump gave Zelenskyy 2 or 3 drinks. Of course, Gerald's flail of information is simply to unpack the president's message with the information received in the state. He immediately has his own focus. Of course, Trump can still speak for another 2,000. To Putin is needed for these more Putin. Trump did not go numb in the fact that he was not all about adoration with Putin, so that they could start Ukraine with peacefulness. Their head idea was not. And boring with Putin. I will expose Ukraine and Europe in Dunya, which does not want, but we want it here. And he doesn't want elections, but we want them here. And you can torture, and through Trump, I also went to Putin, and said that I would not be like that. It's not that the adoption of such unfair things as the withdrawal of Ukrainian visas, the Russian church. Abracadabra propane. Allegedly, of course, it can lead to internal political destabilization in our Ukraine. And Putin, in principle, was numb in destabilization. Destabilization is underway, so help his bow. It is called the Russian reset, and I will start the territory of Ukraine. And on Putin and still sleeps lush. It's easier and Trump. To the elections, but I can be to the elections and ensure the elections. American cigars will come to them. Will Navi have American ones or such? You will have legitimate elections. Well, Trump, in an interview with a politician, is missed in such elections. I'll tell you, in such elections, the CPU is a competitive choice. The participants of the elections are on the right informative minds. So I do not know what Trump will say either. And what can a pro-Russian candidate do in such elections? Well, I'm talking about the choice. To whom? To the hostage Vitaly Poroshenko. That's if someone leaned out. And people just you decided to vote, and they will vote for like and say, and you before Putin, and kiss him a lot. But the same policy is not for choice. What do you think, a man from Bojul on Arestovich at the elections? Well, Sasha, not seriously. And why are you so embedded in it? I will not take a part in hypothetical elections. I'm showing sociology, it's for marathons, pledged elections. Because all the pegged general is overestimated by the pledged sovereign service and in the service of the sovereign service. And let's say they will accept his rate in the garden. And with such a rank, I am against the guilt of my Ukraine now. I think about the president's office of the come ill fought. Now, if the war period sounds like a coincidence, you can go to the rate from the sovereign service, taken by participation in the elections. I will say that it's just 90 days, in principle, a military stat. Ends. They just don't shoot mines there for 60 days. Even now the ambassador to the UK, I don't want to be an ambassador for the presidency, but I'm not saying that this can't be. And the rating is laid down. And that's how much more can be embedded in those situations for Trump, for Putin. Allegedly, these chances are stats on the President Yulia Tymoshenko. She can become a leader on the Tezi was not everything, and was in a corrupt official, I will be added to it. And a politician can say that. I repeat, I will become a valuable military one. Allegedly, Yulia Tymoshenko's ratings were boosted at a time by a minimal political one. I'm on this one, and the party could have submitted a Prohidny barrier to parliament for these mines. I'll tell you again, cola is running out of wine, all this can change. Yulia Tymoshenko's rating may rise. And what will she say important in the president's guilt? Torture allegedly really wants to end this war. To be added in kind and in two presidents. You are elected in the Donbass. Well, it's convenient. Not just in such Yumova the president and guilt Botus. By ear it is. With the Franklin Roosevelt phenomenon. What Roosevelt was president of 4 terms for nothing. There was also wine? And he had competitors after all. Types of the Republican Party, and they didn't have greedy chances. Greedy. The fact that he was taken by the president's yak and carried out the war. All logic is logic, and also simple. I'm on it again, for the guilt in the president's guilt is not removed. I tend to clean up. I'm also talking about the elections. And I think that I will not be out of choice, I will tell you everything. And on what criteria of the candidate for the rolled-up carriage of the brother of a really worthy president. History has prescribed a military hour, but we have in truth professionalism, a political program. A cheat understanding of how to develop Ukraine and the confluence of understanding with yours. And also, really enticing Putin to propa and implement the Georgian scenario here, according to the youth of the United States. And the taken Ukraine, politically. I can explain it simply. And accepted. The Georgian scenario here is not that Putin has found out the fact and the foundations of the Georgians as a nation. It's as if the Russian zones are often flooded in and on the Russian Empire itself, and moreover, Georgians come to Russians, Ukrainians are not from the point of view of Putin and Russian chauvinists by the people, but by such a rank, not by the subject of the state. In the mind of Russian chauvinists, tilki of two peoples hang out on the terrain of the Kolishnaya Russian Empire, Ukrainians and Belarus. From Putin's point of view, from the point of view of all those who are his Ukrainians and Belarusians, and political entities, valuable peoples, and food warehouses, but also the Russian nation Yaksy Bulo up to 1917th Rock. Kola in Pedrukniki in Russian schools talked about the Russian people from the Great Russians, Little Russians, and Belarusians. That Putin does not need to take Ukraine politically, for of course he needs to eat to the kind of cotton wool. Immediately throw off the masks. That Putin does not need the presidential elections of Ukraine in the Ukrainian territories, but the necessary elections of the President of Russia. But think for yourself, well, logically ask. Putin also needed a good, loyal Ukraine. In 2014 lesson about Inaksh. Wine was the voice in Kiev sovereign coup. And legally Vlad began with President Viktor Yanukovych, Prime Minister Azarov injections, and the laws on sexual parliament in Tekin Kharkov was exhausted for the tables of the law of Ukraine and the Russian troops. And Ukraine, as you know, Russia. And she signed the contract, and the legitimate president of Ukraine. Who will say that this is a legitimate president? Who? And now in power in Kharkiv, the president of Ukraine Yanukovych, in Kiev. In the icon of the Bosque of the president Alexander Turchinov is still the Ukrainian parliament, and for such minds, it would be possible to mate with a thief in order to take the head of the Verkhovna Rada of the new one. And in the icon is the Belarusian president. With this is already easy. And on these, of course, there are still participants from the party in the region, just to Teklip to Kharkiv. And Putin is absolutely and Nakshidi. Dobkin and Kearns have already been to Russia in moments. Yanukovych arrived at the entrance, and there he brought the deputies to Kharkiv. And it was sent by Yanukovych. Moreover, I turned from Russia, from the instructions, and so Kearns turned completely in Russian, in such a matusku. All Otka Kolomoisky Zalika. Neither Chiyako Kolomoisky was actually in the memory of Yanukovych. Of course. And there would be two Ukraine. Here is one on the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions and Crimea. And it is possible that it was possible to sign up for the Odessa region, Kharkiv, with such sauce, of course, as Athonia. In the heads of law enforcement agencies. And the army is the supreme commander of Kharkov. And I'm sweeping. I'd like to beat Yanukovych ticking to Kharkov. I think that the Russians in the 2004 Rodin and the scenario could be for Kuchma. Go to Kharkov, go through the President Yanukovych. Hold a session of the Verkhovna Rada there. Pushkin is just a view. Here. And there's nothing left. At the same time, Putin, having arrived before not becoming an alternative Ukraine. Progolos the fallowness of the DPIE and LPR and Russification. Kherson region because of Paris to ethnic Ukrainians. We put Russificity in these people by the Russians for the software there. They were just still there often on the ethnically Russian population, on the Kherson Chechen there it was valid. Changed someone's position. That infection, once and for all. The Georgian scenario cannot be here because Georgia is valuable. So, I am still in Ukraine in the date, and he will not be able to purchase the entire territory. And there will be Namaga throughout the territory. I don't want them to try the forgotten Georgian script. It can't lick Ukraine. The existential conflict between the Ukrainian people and the Russian people on Pravda will continue. We can say about the Slovenian Rada, we can say between the Ukrainians that I am Gogol's Little Russia and Shevchenko's Ukraine. Two civilizations in one Ukraine, Yaka Georgia. The Georgians respected everything and the cargo is on us. I didn't have myself as Sumni, Anya of the leaders of the Georgian Democratic Republic. Anya, I'm their poet Galakshan Tabi, not Stalin take or Janakidze. Of course, this is how he wanted Georgia to be autonomous in Russia's warehouse. Stalin, in order to dilute the Georgian Russians in the Kremlin. But I doubt that explain. In the outcome, with the fact that Europe has turned a global video, it is not enough of a friend of the light kind, and solving all the stupid quirks of the Americans. So, I absolutely agree with him. Yaki Putin and Xi Jinping, respectfully, the Moroccans have become the leader of Europe, Tilki Diakuyu and others are holy. There is also the geopolitical role of Polshan. And what kind of people are we all here in Europe? We've been doing well for the whole role, with our Euro-Atlantic solidarity. Received in the state, in May on the was. And I have not yet seen solidarity, America's non-geopolitical role. It's just that in Europe, in mind with the states received, the date turns on Tilki are not their quirks. And also the quirks of the Russian ties. And I'm respecting Europe small proc she's already a single organism. Both the alleged American and Russian claims to Ukraine are total leaders of the ultra-chauvinistic right-wing populist kind. Because the ideology of Trump and Putin is also similar. The fact that this is absolutely the case with you, that sales in Europe, that the European Union has not collapsed. Still victorious Europe has become another geopolitical center of the world. To fight against the billshine of the authority of the ultra-right, populist anti-European forces in Europe, and the ultra-left, such as the most anti-European populist forces in Europe. These are the same anti-European forces as Trumpism, anti-American dialogues, of course. And for what everything is needed for the Ukrainian-Russian guilt to end in a fiasco, the Russian Federation to fight at once over Russia, over the collapse of the economy, on the porch of Russia, on the toothless Trump. And not in Ukraine, I want dictionary Russia to his. The key is in Moscow. Of course, Bulow's reaction is different. After all, the key of exiled Europe is in Moscow. I will still be a weak Russia and will not reveal my aggressive tendencies. Europe will be exiled. But this was not the message of Russia 3 times in the 18th century, in the 19th, and in the 20th. And in the hours of Emperor Alexander Persh, and in the hours of Stalin. Zvezda meant sending Europe. The fact that Russia does not want to be frequent at the European concert. She doesn't want to be a dirigent of a European concert. She wants to be a gendarme on the topic of the concert, of course. And a gendarme in the orchestra is not needed. It is necessary to expel him from the hall, and therefore, he should be brought to the concert hall in handcuffs. Well, in principle, you can't have torture from the parade of European partners. You are sleeping Trump, and his Ukraine cannot be respected by a democratic power. Well, the claims are put on the simple situation of the Europeans themselves. A friend of Filthy knows, and still thinks that Savina can think of such a combination. And I will be the result, of course, can still have my own combination, and we don't know the crock yet. Let's check it out. They also gave a check. I'll hear more. We've been analyzing these moves further. Dyakuyu, friends. I again ask those who are on the air, without subscribing to the channel yet, but subscribe. Weasel, only 9,000 to 1,000,000 were heard. Approx. I can handle it. And as it has already become such, I would say a parable. So sign it, put it like that. Comments on what you think about this situation marks another for the mass of all electricity in our Ukraine. And rich in that, turn on the light. Turn on the light for people so that they don't choke. And Putin, shove your missiles you know where. Here are yours in the Podobake and comments, so help us on our rich with you. So cut it down. Well, and with tools, yes, help the Ukrainian dropped forces take the fate of proven assemblies. I've been collecting people myself. I'm on my old-fashioned social, and today it was on Facebook, for example. For Mrs. Natalia Yarchenko chooses pennies for her son's car, I serve against windy defense. I think you're fine, of course I'm all important to us all. Just one but, so there will be a caress. I think you have your own such buts, then it helps the army, it is often ours with you. She protects us. Dyakuyu.